The letter arrived on a cold, gray morning, the kind of day that seemed to drain the color from the world. Daniel Carter sat at his kitchen table, staring at the envelope in his hands. It was thick, the paper heavy and expensive, with his name written in elegant, looping script. He didn't recognize the handwriting, but the return address sent a chill down his spine: Blackthorn Manor, Ravenswood. Blackthorn Manor. The name alone conjured images of Gothic spires, crumbling stone, and secrets buried deep within its walls. Daniel had never been there, but he knew the stories. The manor had belonged to his estranged uncle, Elias Carter, a man shrouded in mystery and whispered rumors. Elias had died a week ago, and now, it seemed, Daniel was his sole heir. Daniel had no desire to go to Ravenswood. He had built a quiet life for himself in the city, far from the shadows of his family's past. But the letter was insistent, and the lawyer's tone left no room for refusal. So, with a heavy heart, Daniel packed a bag and set off for the manor. The journey was long and dreary, the countryside growing darker and more desolate the closer he got to Ravenswood. By the time he arrived, the sun had set, and the manor loomed before him like a specter. It was even more imposing than he had imagined, a sprawling, decaying structure with ivy crawling up its walls and windows that seemed to stare out like hollow eyes. Daniel stepped inside, the heavy oak door creaking on its hinges. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew, and the floorboards groaned under his weight. He flicked on a light switch, but the bulbs flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the room. The lawyer had left a note on the hall table, along with a set of keys. "Welcome to Blackthorn Manor," it read. *** Take your time to settle in. The house is yours now, ***. Daniel didn't feel welcome. He felt like an intruder, stepping into a place that didn't want him. But he had no choice. He was here now, and he had to make the best of it. The first night was the worst. Daniel chose a bedroom on the second floor, a large, drafty room with a four-poster bed and a fireplace that hadn't been used in decades. He lit a fire, hoping to chase away the chill, but the flame seemed to flicker and die too quickly, as if the house itself were resisting. As he lay in bed, staring up at the cracked ceiling, he heard it, a faint whisper, so soft that he almost thought it was the wind. But the windows were closed, and the air was still. The whisper came again, louder this time, and Daniel sat up, his heart pounding. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the empty room. There was no response, but the whispering continued, growing louder and more insistent. It seemed to be coming from the walls, a low, guttural murmur that sent shivers down his spine. Daniel got out of bed and pressed his ear to the wall, but the sound was everywhere and nowhere all at once. He spent the rest of the night sitting in a chair by the fire, clutching a blanket around his shoulders. The whispering never stopped, and by morning, he was exhausted. Determined to uncover the source of the whispering, Daniel began to explore the manor. He started in the library, a vast, dusty room filled with books that hadn't been touched in years. As he browsed the shelves, he came across a leather-bound journal with his uncle's name embossed on the cover. The journal was filled with Elias's handwriting, cramped and hurried, as if he had been writing in a frenzy. The entries were disjointed, jumping from mundane observations to cryptic warnings. But one passage stood out. "The house is alive. It feeds on fear, on despair. It whispers to me, day and night, and I can no longer tell if the voice is in my head or in the walls. I have tried to resist, but it is too strong. It wants something from me, something I cannot give. But it will not stop until it has it." Daniel's hands trembled as he read the words. He had always thought his uncle was eccentric, but this was something else entirely. What had Elias been trying to say? What did the house want? As he turned the page, a photograph fell out, a faded, sepia-toned image of a man standing in front of the manor. The man's face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his expression one of utter despair. Daniel recognized him immediately. It was Elias, but he looked like a shadow of the man Daniel had known. Daniel spent the next few days poring over the journal, trying to piece together the mystery of Blackthorn Manor. He learned that Elias had been obsessed with the occult, convinced that the house was built on ancient, cursed ground. He had performed rituals to appease the spirits, but something had gone wrong. According to the journal, Elias had summoned a powerful entity, a being that fed on human suffering. The entity had taken root in the house, binding itself to the walls and feeding on the fear of those who lived there. Elias had tried to banish it, but the ritual had failed, and the entity had turned on him. Daniel knew he had to finish what his uncle had started. He found the instructions for the ritual in the journal, along with a list of items he would need: a black candle, a vial of salt, a piece of obsidian, and a lock of his own hair. On the night of the new moon, Daniel prepared the ritual in the library. He drew a circle on the floor with the salt, placing the items at each point. He lit the black candle and sat in the center of the circle, holding the obsidian in his hand. As he began to chant the incantation, the room grew cold, and the whispering started again, louder and more frantic. The walls seemed to close in around him, and the shadows twisted and writhed like living things. Daniel's heart pounded as he felt the presence of the entity, a dark, malevolent force that seemed to fill the room. He continued to chant, his voice trembling but determined. Suddenly, the candle flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. The whispering stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, with a deafening roar, the entity burst forth from the walls, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to consume everything in its path. Daniel held up the obsidian, focusing all his willpower on the ritual. He poured the salt over the stone and pressed it against the circle, chanting the final words of the incantation. The entity let out a shriek of rage, and the room was filled with a blinding light. When the light faded, the entity was gone. The room was silent, and the air felt clean and pure. Daniel collapsed to the floor, exhausted but relieved. He had done it, he had banished the entity and freed the house from its curse. In the days that followed, Daniel felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. The house no longer felt oppressive, and the whispering had stopped. He knew that the entity was gone, and he felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that he had righted the wrongs of his family. But as he walked through the house, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. The walls no longer whispered, but there was a new sound, a faint, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to come from deep within the house. Daniel tried to ignore it, telling himself that it was just his imagination. But as the days turned into weeks, the hum grew louder, more insistent. He began to have nightmares, vivid and terrifying dreams that left him drenched in sweat and gasping for air. One night, as he lay in bed, he heard it, a faint whisper, so soft that he almost thought he had imagined it. He sat up, his heart pounding, and listened. The whisper came again, louder this time, and he realized with a sinking feeling that it was coming from the walls. Daniel's blood ran cold as he realized the truth: the entity was not gone. It had only been weakened, and now it was growing stronger, feeding on his fear and despair. He knew that he had to act quickly, before it was too late. But as he sat there, staring at the walls, he felt a strange sense of resignation. He had fought so hard, but the entity was too powerful. It had been a part of the house for generations, and it would not be easily defeated. Daniel lay back down, pulling the covers up to his chin. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, and he knew that he was no longer alone. The entity was with him, in the walls, in the shadows, in his mind. And as he closed his eyes, he realized that he would never be free. The house still stands, a dark and foreboding presence on the edge of Ravenswood. The locals avoid it, whispering stories of the family that lived there and the terrible things that happened within its walls. But if you listen closely, on a quiet night when the wind is still, you might hear it, a faint whisper, so soft that you almost think you imagined it. And if you dare to step inside, you might feel it, a cold, malevolent presence that seems to watch you from the shadows. The house is alive, and it hungers. And it will never let you go.